We are here today to authoritatively express that President Trump did not commit an insurrection, and we believe Congress has a unique role in making that declaration. It's not the job of the states, and especially not the job of some bureaucrats in Colorado, to make this assessment and interfere with the rights of voters to cast their vote for the candidate of their choice.
In Phoenix, Arizona. That's after leaving New York City for California last week.
Last week, this video went viral. It shows a group of people believed to be illegal immigrants attacking two police officers near Times Square. Manhattan's district attorney's office confirmed to NTD that the suspects were released without bail.
Reports later suggested that the suspects boarded a bus for California after having been released from custody in New York. Fox News now says that authorities arrested the suspects in Phoenix, Arizona.
ICE sources reportedly confirmed the arrests last night. It's not clear which of the suspects have been arrested.
Also on Monday, New York City Mayor Eric Adams spoke about illegal immigrants who commit crimes.
I want to reiterate the overwhelming number of 170,000+ migrant asylum seekers are attempting to continue their next leg of their journey of pursuing the American dream.
Catch and release.
Crime will be treated like any other criminal in this city. The small number of people are breaking the law and having a huge impact on our public safety, and that is why we zeroed in on them.
City officials added that it's often hard to track.
Why'd you let the man out of jail?
Crimes.
That's because the city sometimes has no information about them, such as no criminal history, no photos, no phone number, or other information.
House lawmakers are set to vote today on a resolution to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The House Homeland Security Committee filed its impeachment resolution last week. They accused Mayorkas of high crimes and misdemeanors in his handling of the southern border. Two GOP congressmen, Representatives Tom McClintock and Ken Buck, have already said they would vote against the resolution. Both have argued that an impeachable offense has not been identified. With full attendance, Republicans can only lose 3 votes to pass the impeachment resolution. If the full House passes the articles, Mayorkas would become the first cabinet secretary to be impeached in nearly 150 years. Coming up, a super PAC backing President Biden reportedly plans to spend millions highlighting rival Donald Trump's legal issues. Find out why a super PAC is doing this and not the Biden campaign itself.
And who would former President Trump choose as his running mate? We asked New Yorkers what they think. More in just a moment here on NTD News Today.
There's been an awful lot of violence done by illegal aliens. A woman got drugged by a couple people on a moped. A police officer got those 2 police got assaulted in New York, and 3 of them got on a bus and left. And I tell you, we're going to be getting a lot more of that stuff. A lot more. Because they were promised things they're not getting. And they're pissed off. And that's a fact.
Has amnesty. That's false. Nobody will be legalized by this bill. This is just made up. I've heard that this bill supposedly gives work visas to illegal immigrants on the border. That's false. That's something we're already doing. So this bill actually ends that. And so I'm just asking people to have disagreements and debates about provisions that are actually in the text.
Daniel DiMartino, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Congressman Jim Jordan says Amazon caved into pressure from the White House to censor books related to COVID-19 vaccines in early 2021. That's according to new emails obtained by subpoena. NTD's Daniel Wanahan has more on the allegations.
Congressman Jim Jordan says internal Amazon documents were obtained through subpoena by the House Judiciary Committee and the Government Weaponization Subcommittee. Jordan dubbed the internal Amazon documents the Amazon Files. He says the never-before-released internal emails reveal that the Biden White House pressured Amazon to censor books that expressed views the administration did not approve of. The congressman shared email communication where an Amazon official asks, "Is the Biden administration asking us to remove books?" Jordan wrote on X that Andy Slavitt, a former White House senior advisor for COVID response, was pressuring Amazon at the same time. The congressman says Slavitt wrote an email in March 2021 demanding to know who he and his White House colleagues could talk to at the company about the high levels of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation of Amazon. According to Jordan, the White House ran keyword searches for controversial topics such as vaccine to conclude that there was propaganda and misinformation in books sold in Amazon's bookstore, and then emailed Amazon when it didn't like how the search results appeared. Jordan says Amazon decided to hold off on doing a manual intervention to censor books at first, not out of any commitment to free speech, but because doing so would be too visible to the American public and likely to spur criticism from conservative media. Jordan wrote that Amazon originally resisted the White House pressure. The company argued that retailers are different than social media communities, and that Amazon provides customers with access to a variety of viewpoints, adding that its company guidelines do not specifically address content about vaccines. But eventually, the company implemented a do not promote directive on so-called anti-vax books on the same day Amazon representatives met with the White House. In March, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case initiated by attorneys general from Missouri and Louisiana. They alleged that the Biden administration collaborated with social media firms to stifle freedom of speech concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
In a first and exclusive, few in their own ranks, is there a possibility this could fail?
Yeah, Tiff, so we're waiting to see those results. Just moments from now, they'll be taking the vote on this, and it is a very real possibility that it could fail. We asked Republicans how they feel about heading into tonight's vote on such shaky ground. They said that they were not concerned to let the chips fall where they may because they still feel an obligation to send a message with this vote. Now, we know of at least 2 Republicans who are opposed to this, meaning with Republicans' slim majority, they cannot afford to lose even one more vote. Of those who are opposed, they say that Republicans are really undermining the Constitution here. They also worry that under a next Republican-controlled executive branch, they could be vulnerable to a Democrat-controlled Congress. Listen to this.
There'll be nobody there to stop them because we will have been complicit in redefining the fundamental definition of impeachment.
Now, as we said, we're eagerly awaiting this result tonight, considering it is up in the air where Republicans stand as a whole on this. But, Tiff, even if Mayorkas is impeached here in the House, it's highly unlikely that he will be impeached in the Democrat-controlled Senate. Tiff, back to you.
Melina, thank you for that update.
The militant group's response to the latest plan for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages was generally positive. That's the assessment from Qatar Tuesday, as Hamas reiterated its demand for an end to the war, something Israel has thus far ruled out. Qatar's prime minister announced the response during a news conference with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said he would brief Israeli leaders on it Wednesday when he meets with them. Qatar has been working with the U.S. and Egypt to broker a ceasefire that would involve a halt in fighting for several weeks and the release of the over 100 hostages still held by Hamas. But the militant group is also expected to demand the release of a large number of Palestinian prisoners, including high-profile militants, in exchange for the hostages. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ruled out both demands. Back at home, a federal appeal case said all 4 fastening bolts were missing before the plane took off from Portland, Oregon on January 5th. The NTSB did not officially name a cause or point fingers. That will come at the end of an investigation that could last a year or longer. But Boeing CEO David Calhoun issued a statement saying, quote, "Whatever final conclusions are reached, Boeing is accountable for what happened. An event like this must not happen on an airplane that leaves our factory. We simply must do better for our customers and their passengers." And the new chief of the Federal Aviation Administration testified before a House Transportation Subcommittee Tuesday. FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker says the agency is halfway through a 6-week audit involving 24 inspectors in a Boeing 737 plant in Washington and a half dozen at a plant in Kansas where door plugs are made. They are reportedly looking for gaps in the quality of work during the manufacturing process that may have contributed to the door plug incident. Whitaker vowed the FAA will take appropriate and necessary action to keep the flying public safe. The Internal Revenue Service says it's poised to take in hundreds of billions of dollars more in overdue and unpaid taxes than previously anticipated. Tax revenues are expected to rise by as much as $561 billion through 2034, thanks to stepped-up enforcement made possible with money from the Inflation Reduction Act, which became law in August of 2022. The Congressional Budget Office had estimated that the tens of billions of new IRS funding provided would increase revenues by $180.4 billion from 2022 to 2031. Administration officials are using the report to promote the IRS as it continually faces threats to its funding. If the resources are maintained, the agency estimates revenues could reach as much as $851 billion over 10 years.
They merely utter the word gender or claim to have confusion about their gender. They're then put to a gender clinic, and then once they're there, it's really just sort of like this conveyor belt down this pathway that can lead to permanent medical interventions.
And while the data is limited, how common is it for those suffering from, say, gender dysphoria to be victims of abuse or be suffering some form of other trauma or even mental illness?
It's extremely common. I mean, there's evidence to suggest that the vast majority of kids who come out with the gender issues are somewhere on the autism spectrum. The majority have a history of, it can be sexual abuse, but definitely other mental health issues, things like anxiety and other traumas in their life. And these are often swept under the rug. In fact, in a recent whistleblower case, the people who are supposed to be in charge of, putting out safeguards for these individuals said that these pre-existing types of mental health conditions should not act as an impediment to being transitioned and put on these life-altering hormones.
And what seems to be the correlation, if there is one, between, say, trauma, abuse, and gender dysphoria?
It's extremely tight link. Well over 50% have this some association with trauma or mental health issues. It's quite the majority. Usually, gender dysphoria comes about because of these pre-existing issues, these pre-existing mental health conditions. But then, once they utter the word gender, suddenly their entire diagnostic criteria that the doctors are using is viewed through the lens of gender dysphoria, where they think, oh, if we just treat gender dysphoria, then we'll alleviate all of these other comorbid mental health issues, when in reality, it's the other way around.
Now, the New York Times published an op-ed that highlights the stories of several detransitioners. It's also calling for an honest debate around the dangers of quote-unquote gender-affirming care for youth. Now, how significant is this piece?
This is a huge,
but I don't want to jinx him.
There have been detransitioners trying to get their stories in large outlets since detransitioners have existed. Right-wing outlets have been the only outlets that have been willing to even listen to them, because it goes against sort of this progressive narrative about trans kids and the benefits of gender-affirming care. And, they like to say that detransitioner is extremely rare, or that no one ever regrets this. Finally, we have a piece that highlights very specific examples of medical malpractice taking place in this area of gender care. And I'm thankful it's here, because, we've been trying to get an article like this in such a high-profile, left-leaning newspaper for many years.
And why do you think there is that silence, especially from the more progressive left media?
The silence is the result of them being afraid of their base to some degree. I mean, I felt silenced when I was in academia. I used to be an academic biologist. Then I started talking about why there's only two sexes. And I faced an immediate ostracization from my colleagues. And many other people feel the same way. And so often they just either don't touch the issue at all, or they just really use it. They use very severe, like, culture war terms when they do this. They don't take an honest look, because they get such backlash whenever they touch this topic in a journalistic manner.
Colin Wright, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you.
Some breaking news. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas just narrowly escaped impeachment. The House vote was extremely close, with just 4 Republicans voting against impeaching him. Moving on to sports, the American Gaming Association says nearly 68 million Americans plan to bet on this year's Super Bowl. Betting participation is projected to be 35% higher than last year, setting a new record. Bettors plan to wager an estimated $23.1 billion on this year's Super Bowl. That's up from $16 billion last year. The projection accounts for both legal and illegal sports betting. Sports betting is legal in 38 states plus Washington, D.C. About 73% of adults say they plan to watch the game this year. 47% of bettors plan to bet on the Kansas City Chiefs. And now for more sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, some possible groundbreaking news in college basketball as Dartmouth's players are closer to becoming employees of the school. Where do things stand now?
Yeah, the players actually voted unionized all the way back in September. But yesterday, a regional official for the National Labor Relations Board ruled that the players are employees of the school. That clears the way for a national union vote to be held. Now, the school does have a right to appeal that decision. They previously argued that players shouldn't be considered employees, saying that athletics are part of the academic mission of the school, much like performing in the orchestra. Now, should the players indeed join a union, they would be able to negotiate salary as well as working conditions, like travel and even like practice hours. Now, it's important to note that Dartmouth's players, like all Ivy League players, do not receive athletic scholarships, though the school has argued that the program loses money as it is.
Now, this has been a rising issue in college athletics. What's the NCAA's position on all this?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Dartmouth's, steadfasting in insisting that these players are students, not employees. I'm sure part of the reason the NCAA relented and allowed these student athletes to finally make money off their name, image, likeness probably was in the hopes it would squash this employee conversation. I think for the schools, their position becomes, where does it end? Do band members become employees as well? And then what are the implications of this? Can high school athletes unionize too? There's a lot of questions it raises. Now, it's also important to note that the NCAA has a relatively new president in Charlie Baker, who's already floated the ideas of these big revenue schools, like in the power conferences, paying their athletes a stipend anyway. But those schools will mainly just be in those power conferences. The Ivy League is not one of those. In any case, the NCAA's whole amateur model really is starting to crumble.
Well, now, shifting gears to the NFL, a popular comparison is being made between Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes and seven-time Super Bowl winner Tom Brady. How do they compare at similar stages of their careers?
Yeah, there's actually a fair amount of similarities. Both of them sat on the bench as rookies and then really took off as starters. Brady led the Patriots to Super Bowl.
NTD's Jack Bradley has more.
The ability to speak is fundamental to how we do things in this great country. And if we lose that, oh my goodness.
Lawmakers are expressing concerns over how the government could potentially use artificial intelligence to mass censor speech, pointing out that the Biden administration is already censoring speech using tools that are currently available.
Artificial intelligence introduces a new dimension, offering the unprecedented ability to monitor, to flag, and to censor billions of individuals at a scale and scope never before conceivable.
Investigative journalist Li Fong says both the public and private sectors are working on censorship. For example, AI firm Logically, which allegedly suppressed information during the COVID lockdowns.
Logically has discussed a proposal to automatically counter hate speech or misinformation with AI to kind of engage bots to algorithmically argue on the internet on behalf of the government.
Reporter Caitlin Richardson says the government is advancing censorship tools by giving money to private companies. She discovered this when she was investigating the National Science Foundation, a government agency.
What I discovered was a multi-million-dollar effort to build what I call a censorship industrial complex, using taxpayer dollars as seed funding for various projects. The efforts fit within the broader trend of the federal government's increasing involvement in online censorship.
Richardson says the agency is giving researchers hundreds of thousands in tax money to create tools that warn journalists if their content is spreading what it calls false narratives that help journalists locate and correct what it considers misinformation and that locate the original source of what it considers